Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 Senate and House elections, and I'll be looking at specifically why Democrats have almost locked down the Rust Belt and the Blue Wall part of the Rust Belt in the 2024 elections at the Senate and House levels. So, this will be kind of a video where I broadly speak to where Democrats have improved in the Midwest over the course of the past 7-8 years, really since Donald Trump first won in 2016. And I think it's an important kind of story to look at, and it tells us a lot about 2024. So I'm going to start by going back to 2016. In 2016, Donald Trump came within a point of winning Minnesota, or came within a point and a half winning Minnesota, won Wisconsin, won Michigan, won Pennsylvania. And he was the first Republican presidential candidate to win these three states concurrently since Ronald Reagan in 1984. And he came the closest to winning the state of Minnesota since Ronald Reagan in 1984. He only, like I said, he only lost it by about a point. Reagan lost it by a bit less, but they did roughly equally as well. And again, Minnesota has not voted for a Republican presidential candidate since 1972. So what Donald Trump did there, even though he didn't win, it was equally as impressive. Now, Democrats were very shocked by this. Hillary Clinton expected to win these states, or at least most of them. Pennsylvania was always competitive, but she was very shocked, I'd imagine, to lose Wisconsin and Michigan. And Democrats in Senate races, they lost a race they were favored to win heavily in Wisconsin. They lost a race they were considered to be slight favorites in Pennsylvania. So that was a huge problem for them in 2016. And so following this really disastrous showing for the party, they regrouped. They had a renewed focus on the Midwest, and in 2018, in the midterms, they won every single governor's race in the Midwest, or in the, I should say, Rust Belt, because we're not talking about Ohio and Indiana or Illinois, but in these highlighted states, they won every single governorship in 2018. In Michigan and Wisconsin, they picked up seats. These were states that were held by Republicans. Michigan, Republican incumbent was term limited. Democrats won it back easily. In Wisconsin, Democrats took out a Republican incumbent governor, Scott Walker, who was very, very polarizing figure. He was a big he was kind of public enemy number one for a lot of Democrats in the Midwest, and they were able to take him out in 2018. So they had good accomplishments in 2018. Then in 2020, obviously, Joe Biden wins the 2020 election, and he does that because he's able to win back Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And he also does 6% better than Hillary Clinton in Minnesota. And in 2022, we saw Democrats maintain control of these four states. In fact, in Michigan and Minnesota, they won back the state legislatures, which was huge. That is equally as important as winning back the governorship. No one talks about state legislative races because they're not as high profile or as, interesting, I guess. But Democrats flipped the state house and state senate of Michigan. And in Minnesota, they'd held the state house, but they had not held the state senate. They won the state senate back. And so that also is very important to remember. And that is what has allowed Democrats in those two states to pass pretty progressive legislation. And in Pennsylvania, they actually did win the state house by one seat. They won it by one seat, and the state senate, not enough seats are up for election, but that could flip in 2024. So, and then obviously I forgot to mention this, but in 2023, Democrats flipped the Supreme Court of Wisconsin, and so the Rust Belt has been swinging back to Democrats, and it's been doing so in a very, very consistent way. At the Senate level, Democrats flipped Pennsylvania, and they have not lost a Senate race in Michigan in decades. Minnesota has been similar. Wisconsin, they lost in 2022, but they won the 2018 Senate race by double digits, so kind of a mixed bag there. But they've been doing it on the Senate level, governor level, obviously, and on the state level with state legislative races. So it's been really good for Democrats in the Midwest. And, it has been smooth sailing. These have been competitive races where Democrats really had to fight to win, but it's been going well. And so today's video is kind of to highlight why they're doing well. And again, just to look at the races that they have effectively put out of play for Republicans. So I do want to briefly talk about 2022 in these just governor's races specifically, because all four of these states had governor's races in 2022. Democrats won Minnesota by 8. They won Michigan by 11, Pennsylvania by 15, and Wisconsin by 3.5. And so that's obviously very important to remember, because state races are not always indicative of how they're going to vote federally, but they do kind of show the will of the broader electorate when they look at how the local parties are doing. And what do I mean by that? Well, governor's races are a good way to test the competency of a state party, and that can often be more reflective than even a presidential race. So, for example, in Kansas, Democrats won the governorship, and that's not to say that Kansas is a blue state, but it is to say that the Kansas Democrats as a state party are more well-liked than the Kansas Republicans. And so if you don't know a ton about Kansas's recent electoral history, that might be surprising because it's like, well, Kansas has elected a Democrat to the Senate in like 80 years. It hasn't voted for a Democrat presidentially since I don't even know when, probably 1964 if I had to guess. And Biden lost by 15. So there's no argument to be made that Kansas is a blue state, but there is an argument to be made that Kansas, locally, voters prefer Democrats. That's why they reelected a Democratic governor. That's why they have historically, or I shouldn't say historically, but for the past decade or so, Republicans in Kansas have underperformed their federal counterparts. So, for example, Sam Brownback, who was the governor of Kansas, first elected in 2010, he, in 2014, when he ran for re-election, was so unpopular that despite the red wave, he only won by 2% in Kansas. And then he got even more unpopular, and Republicans in 2018 lost the governorship by over 5%. And so that is a really big indicator of how one unpopular governor or one unpopular administration can kill a state party. We saw this happen in Illinois with the Republicans. Bruce Rauner was elected in 2014, and he was viewed to be a potential kind of olive branch extender for Republicans in Illinois, and he became unpopular, and Republicans haven't been competitive in Illinois since 2014. And so there are consistent, and there's examples of this on the Democratic side as well. And New York is potentially one of those, but we haven't gotten to that point yet. But local parties really have an impact on how voters perceive electoral politics in their state. If a party governs a state poorly, maybe they run the state into bankruptcy, the public schools start failing, or the infrastructure is bad, that can cost a party. And so it happens in Kansas, happens in Michigan, happened in Illinois, happened in New York, and it's really important to remember that. And so to kind of start in Michigan, Republicans have had a really rough past 5 years here because in 2018, Gretchen Whitmer defeated Bill Schuette, or Schuette, I think is how you pronounce it, Bill Schuette, although I'm not entirely sure. But she defeated Bill Schuette, and that she ran on fixing the roads because the perception among voters in the state was that Republicans had really, really been bad for the state's infrastructure. And so Whitmer wins, and then fast forward to 2023, where the Michigan Republican Party is now almost bankrupt. They, I think, have $50,000 in the bank, something like that, which is not a lot for a statewide political organization that's supposed to be competitive in a very important election coming up. And they're just really not doing anything that would lead one to believe they're going to recover anytime soon. So since they've lost the governorship in 2018, they've fallen off, and they really haven't shown any signs of recovering. In fact, it's getting worse. So that's one example. And then you go to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, where Republicans don't even have any Senate recruits there. In Wisconsin, not a single candidate has filed to unseat Tammy Baldwin. And obviously she's a popular incumbent. I don't think that Republicans would be favored to beat her anyways. But the fact that not a single person wants to run as a Republican in this Senate race in a state like Wisconsin, that's terrible news for Republicans. And then you go to Pennsylvania, I mean, it's likely that David McCormick is going to run for Republicans to unseat Bob Casey, but he's not even from Pennsylvania. He's from Connecticut. He's a sort of corporate executive from Connecticut, and he might run for Senate in Pennsylvania, but he will probably not win. And so that just goes to show how Republicans don't have a good bench. They don't have any, popular governors or state officials or congressmen or congresswomen, congresspeople to run. And that is just a terrible, terrible sign for the competency of a state party. And it kind of shows the decline that Republicans have gone through in the Midwest for the past 5 to 7 years. And so it's a similar thing in the House. We look at these House results that I'm expecting. I think Democrats in Wisconsin are likely to redraw the map just because they now have a majority on the Supreme Court, and they could label it as a gerrymander. And so what could happen is Democrats are going to draw this district to be a bit more favorable to them, and I think they win the third back narrowly. I think they might draw the first district to be also more favorable to Democrats, but they could lose it just because Republicans have a strong incumbent there. And so Wisconsin is already a net gain there for the party. And then you go to Michigan, Democrats, their most competitive seat's probably Slotkin's seat because she's running for Senate, but they're still favored to win that. Republicans are going to run Tom Barrett again, who lost by 6% last year, so he's not an ideal candidate. And on the other hand, Democrats have two pickup opportunities. They have in the 4th District, which obviously only voted for Trump by about 4% in 2020, 20 is very left trending. Maybe if Biden wins the state by more, he could actually flip the district at the top of the ticket, and Democrats could potentially rely on that to win down ballot. And then you go to the 10th district over here, which Democrats were outspent in by like a ratio of like 20-1 in November 2022, and they came within 0.4% of winning. And then in Pennsylvania, Democrats also have some go opportunities because they might, they're going to have to defend Matt Cartwright, who's in a Trump plus 3 seat. I think he'll be in a competitive race. Susan Wild maybe potentially, but to a lesser extent. And then in the 10th district and in the 1st district, these are both races where Republicans have a lot to lose because in the 10th, this seat voted for Josh Shapiro in the governor's race. Biden, I think, only lost by a couple points in 2020. Again, it's a left-running seat, so if he does better statewide, he might actually win it or come close to winning it. And Scott Perry's not the best incumbent. He was, heavily involved with the January 6th stuff, and I think that hurts him. And so that's an example of something that could really hurt Republicans. And then you go to the 10th or the 1st district over here in Bucks County, which has long been held by a popular Republican, or not long, but he's won a couple terms. Brian Fitzpatrick has as a popular moderate Republican, probably the most moderate in the House, and he's getting a primary challenge from the more Trumpian wing of the party because they say he's too moderate. And if he loses this primary to a Trump Republican, this seat, just like many others, probably goes blue. It's a Biden plus 4 seat. He probably wins this by more next time. And considering the fact that Fitzpatrick has been the only Republican to really be competitive in this district for the past couple election cycles, it's likely that if he loses the primary, this seat flips blue. So this seat could easily flip blue. This seat could flip blue potentially. Democrats get lucky. Maybe they win back the 1st district of Wisconsin or the 10th of Michigan, maybe even the 4th of Michigan. And so if all goes well for Democrats, they're looking at a House map where it doesn't want me to click on them because it'll move it back. But if you do the math, if Democrats do as well as they could potentially do in a best case scenario, they're winning 3 seats here, 5 seats there. They are winning the vast majority of House seats in the Midwest just because Republicans are having bad primaries because they lost the state Supreme Court in Wisconsin because they're bankrupt in Michigan. And that is terrible, terrible news for the GOP because, again, in 2016, they held the majority of House seats in Wisconsin. They held the majority of House seats in Michigan. They held the majority of House seats in Pennsylvania. In Minnesota, I think they had a split. I think it was even. And that's the only one that stayed the same. And then, again, to go back to the Senate races here, Republicans likely to lose Minnesota by probably 15 to 20 points to Amy Klobuchar, who's very popular. So Democrats, I don't want to say they're like resurging in the Midwest. They are doing better than they were 5 to 7 years ago, but they are almost rebuilding the blue wall is what I would say. It's, again, Midwest is not safe blue. I wouldn't call any of these states solid for Joe Biden in 2024. But if Democrats continue to have the momentum, Republicans continue to struggle, this will be a new resurrected blue wall. In 2016, people said it was gone because Trump won it. But if you look carefully, local races and even Senate races and Senate races and presidential races, they're tilting blue again. Michigan voted for Trump in 2016, hasn't gone Republican at the state level at all since then. Pennsylvania voted for Trump in 2016. Republicans haven't won a federal race there since then. They won the I believe, treasurer race in 2020, but that's really it. So they haven't won a federal race there since then. In fact, they lost the Senate race in 2022, which was a pickup for Democrats. Wisconsin voted for Trump in 2016. Republicans won the Senate race. They had full control of the state with the governorship and the state legislature. They've lost the governorship, and Joe Biden won it in 2020. Minnesota, Republicans came within a point of winning at the presidential level in 2016, and in 2020, they won back the state Senate. 2022, they lose it. Democrats win the governorship and pass progressive laws. So the Midwest is getting really bad for Republicans. Democrats in these Senate races, Republicans have found a candidate in Wisconsin. They're likely to lose Minnesota no matter what. In Pennsylvania, kind of a similar story to Wisconsin. McCormick might run, but he's not even from Pennsylvania, and we all know how well that went for the GOP last time. And so Michigan might be their best shot, but Michigan is arguably the most blue out of these states behind Minnesota. It's bluer than Wisconsin, definitely bluer than Pennsylvania. In 2020, voted for Biden by 3%. He might win it by more next time. So maybe Republicans, if they get very lucky, can pick off Michigan, but that's a best-case scenario. And beyond that, they are in a lot of trouble, especially because, again, their state party almost bankrupt. So Democrats, I think, are going to have a really good year in the Midwest, especially in the House and Senate come 2024. Biden, I think, is favored to win these states, all 4 that I've highlighted by decent amounts. But I'm a bit less sure about that. But regardless, the blue wall is potentially being rebuilt, and if Democrats have another good year here in 2024, it might be time to once again characterize these states officially in the tilting or leaning Democratic column. So thank you so much for watching. Again, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'll see you all in the next one.